What would you do if you found a wallet filled with cash on a lonely sidewalk? For Alicia, a young girl who needed the money desperately, the decision wasn't easy. But her choice to return it to its owner set off a chain of life-changing events, uncovering secrets, unexpected kindness, and a bond she never imagined. This heartwarming tale will take you on a journey of honesty, hope, and the power of one simple act. Stay tuned. You won't believe how one lost wallet turned into a story of friendship and legacy. The sun was setting behind the rows of modest houses in the quiet neighborhood of Brookfield, casting a warm golden hue across the streets. Inside one of the homes, Alicia Thompson sat by the living room window, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. Her heart raced as she watched a police car slowly pull up to the curb in front of her house. The sight of the flashing blue lights reflected in the glass sent a chill down her spine. "Mom," she called out, her voice trembling. "There's a police car outside." Carla Thompson, her mother, rushed to the window, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The worry lines on her forehead deepened as she peeked through the blinds. She glanced at Alicia with a look that was a mix of concern and confusion. "Stay here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let me handle this." Carla opened the door cautiously, stepping outside onto the small porch. The police officer stepped out of the car, his expression serious, but not hostile. He was tall, with a kind face that seemed out of place in such a tense moment. Alicia felt her pulse quicken. What could this be about? Had something happened at school? Or was it something else? From her spot behind the curtain, Alicia watched her mother exchange a few words with the officer. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the way her mother's shoulders slumped, the way her hand flew to her mouth, as if she'd just heard something shocking. Alicia's mind raced, replaying the events of the past day. Flashback. Earlier that day. The scene shifts to earlier that afternoon, with Alicia walking home from school. She was wearing her faded blue backpack, the straps fraying slightly at the edges. It was the kind of day she loved, warm but breezy, with a sky so clear it felt like anything was possible. Alicia was lost in thought, her mind drifting between the math test she had aced and the upcoming weekend, where she'd be helping her mom with deliveries for extra money. They weren't well off. In fact, things had been tight ever since her father passed away a few years ago. Her mother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, and Alicia did what she could to help, even if it was just running errands after school. Despite their struggles, Carla always managed to make their small house feel like a home, a place filled with warmth and laughter, no matter how little they had. As Alicia cut through the park, taking her usual shortcut, something caught her eye. There, lying on the ground, was a sleek black leather wallet. It was half hidden in the grass, as if someone had dropped it without noticing. She glanced around, but the park was almost empty, save for a few joggers in the distance. Curious, Alicia bent down and picked it up. The wallet felt heavy in her hand, and when she opened it, her breath hitched. Inside was a thick stack of crisp $100 bills, neatly tucked into the folds. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the contents: credit cards, a business card, and a small, worn photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. For a moment, Alicia just stood there, her mind blank with shock. This kind of money could change things for her and her mother. They could finally pay off some overdue bills, buy groceries without worrying about running out, maybe even replace the broken heater before winter set in. The temptation was strong, almost overwhelming. She counted the bills quickly, her hands trembling slightly. It had to be at least a few $1,000s. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears as she stared at the money, her thoughts racing. What if she kept it? No one was around to see her pick it up. It wasn't like she was stealing. She'd just found it. But then, as quickly as the thought came, it was chased away by a familiar voice in her head. It was her mother's voice, reminding her of the values she had been taught since she was little. We may not have much, but we have our integrity. Money comes and goes, but trust, once you lose that, it's gone forever. Alicia took a deep breath, the image of her mother's face clear in her mind. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant giving up what felt like a lifeline. She carefully placed the money back into the wallet and checked the business card again. The name read, Solomon Hawthorne, private investor. Alicia frowned. She had heard of Mr. Hawthorne before. Everyone in Brookfield knew about the old man who lived in the big, lonely house at the edge of town. He was wealthy, sure, but he was also rumored to be a grumpy recluse, rarely seen in public, and even less likely to be friendly if approached. Still, Alicia made up her mind. It was the right thing to do, and she couldn't ignore that. Tucking the wallet into her backpack, she turned towards Hawthorne's estate, her steps quickening as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The decision felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on her chest, but she pushed forward, determined to return the wallet before she lost her nerve. Back to the present, the sound of the front door opening snapped Alicia out of her thoughts. Her mother stepped back inside, followed by the police officer, whose face had softened considerably. He spotted Alicia standing in the doorway, clutching the strap of her backpack, like a lifeline. "You must be Alicia," the officer said kindly. "I'm Officer Daniels. I believe you have something that belongs to Mr. Solomon Hawthorne." Alicia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She swallowed hard, nodding slowly as she pulled the wallet out of her backpack and handed it over. "I found this in the park," she explained, her voice small. "I was going to return it. I swear, I didn't take anything." Officer Daniels gave her a reassuring smile. "I believe you," he said, glancing at the wallet. "In fact, Mr. Hawthorne asked me to bring him here because he wanted to thank you in person." Before Alicia could respond, the front door creaked open again, and there he was, Mr. Hawthorne himself. He looked even older and more intimidating up close, with sharp blue eyes and a stern expression that seemed carved from stone. For a moment he just stood there, studying Alicia as if she were some kind of puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. "I didn't take any of the money," Alicia blurted out, her voice cracking slightly. "I was just trying to do the right thing." Mr. Hawthorne's expression softened, just a fraction. He stepped forward, holding the wallet in his weathered hands. "I know you didn't," he said quietly, his voice surprisingly gentle. "And that's why I'm here." He paused, taking a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "When I realized I had lost it, I was more upset about this photo than the money." He opened the wallet and pulled out the worn photograph of the smiling woman. "This is my late wife, Elizabeth. It's the last picture I have of her." Alicia felt a lump form in her throat. She glanced up at Mr. Hawthorne, noticing the raw emotion in his eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. In that moment, he didn't seem like the grumpy old man from the rumors. He just looked sad. "I owe you an apology," Mr. Hawthorne continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I misjudged you. I assumed the worst when you were only trying to do something kind. For that, I'm deeply sorry." Carla stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Alicia's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It means a lot to us that you would come here yourself." Mr. Hawthorne nodded, clearing his throat as if to compose himself. "It's the least I could do," he said, "and I'd like to make it up to you, if you'll let me." Alicia could feel the intensity of Mr. Hawthorne's gaze on her, as if he were trying to understand who she really was, standing there, clutching her backpack strap like it was a lifeline. She wasn't sure what to say. His apology was unexpected, and it left her momentarily speechless. She had imagined this encounter 100 times on her walk home, But she never thought it would end, with Mr. Hawthorne standing in her small living room, looking vulnerable. "Please," Mr. Hawthorne said, his voice softer now. "Let me sit down for a moment." Carla nodded quickly and gestured towards the worn-out couch, the one she had bought second-hand years ago, when things were a bit better financially. Alicia watched as Mr. Hawthorne lowered himself carefully onto the cushion, his hands still gripping the wallet, like it was the most precious thing he owned. The room felt smaller, more cramped with him sitting there, but also strangely filled with an unspoken connection. Officer Daniels gave Alicia an encouraging smile before excusing himself. "I'll leave you folks to talk. It was a pleasure meeting you, Alicia. You did a very good thing." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the three of them in an awkward silence. Alicia glanced at her mother, who seemed equally unsure of what to say next. Mr. Hawthorne was the first to break the silence. "I owe you an explanation," he began, his eyes drifting down to the photograph in his hand. "I lost this wallet yesterday when I was visiting the park. It was the anniversary of my wife's passing, and I must have been more distracted than usual. I didn't even realize it was missing until late last night." Alicia bit her lip, feeling a pang of sympathy she hadn't expected. She knew what it was like to lose someone you loved. Her father had passed away when she was just 6, but the loss still felt raw, like an open wound that never quite healed. "I'm really sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "I didn't know about your wife. I just wanted to make sure you got your wallet back." Mr. Hawthorne looked up, and for the first time, there was a warmth in his eyes, a flicker of something softer behind the stern exterior. "You have a good heart, Alicia. That's why I'm here. I wanted to apologize in person for doubting you. It was wrong of me to assume the worst, especially when you did something so kind." Carla, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped closer, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Alicia always tries to do the right thing," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Even when it's not easy. We've had some tough times, but I've always taught her that honesty is the most important thing." Mr. Hawthorne's eyes flicked over to Carla, and for a moment, there was a shared understanding between them. Two parents who knew what it meant to raise a child alone, to carry the weight of loss, and still find a way to keep going. "I can see that," Mr. Hawthorne replied. He took a deep breath, as if bracing himself for what he was about to say next. "And that's why I want to make things right. Alicia, I'd like to offer you something as a thank you for your honesty." Alicia's brow furrowed, and she shook her head quickly. "No, really, you don't have to. I didn't do it expecting anything in return. It was the right thing to do." Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. "Sweetie, let's hear him out," Carla said, her tone soft but serious. Mr. Hawthorne nodded, looking grateful for the chance to continue. He pulled a small, neatly folded check from his wallet and held it out to Alicia. "I know you didn't do this for a reward, but please accept this. It's a small token of my appreciation. I want you to have it." Alicia stared at the check in his hand, her heart pounding in her chest. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She didn't want to look, but her eyes couldn't help but glance at the number written on it. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life, enough to cover their rent for months, maybe even help them catch up on some of the bills that had been piling up on the kitchen counter. She took a shaky step back, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't take this. It's too much." Carla's eyes widened slightly as she saw the check. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then stopped herself, waiting to see what her daughter would do. Mr. Hawthorne didn't pull the check back. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Please, Alicia, this isn't charity. It's a thank you. You did something today that most people wouldn't even think of doing. And it reminded me of the kind of person I used to be before I lost my way, before I started shutting people out." Alicia's mind raced. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her, the same way she had felt it when she first found the wallet. This money could make things easier for her family. It could give them a chance to breathe, to stop worrying about the next bill or the groceries they couldn't afford. But it also felt wrong to take something so big, even if it was a gift. "I just wanted to do the right thing," she repeated, her voice filled with a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. "That's all." "And you did," Mr. Hawthorne replied, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "You did more than the right thing. You reminded me of what kindness looks like. Please take it. Not because you need it, but because you deserve it." Alicia looked up at her mother, searching her face for an answer. Carla's eyes were filled with unshed tears, but there was a small, encouraging smile on her lips. "It's okay, Alicia," she whispered. "Sometimes it's okay to accept help when it's offered with a good heart." With a deep breath, Alicia nodded slowly and reached out to take the check, her hand shaking as she did. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice cracking. "I don't know what to say, but thank you." Mr. Hawthorne's lips curved into a small, gentle smile. "No, Alicia," he said quietly. "Thank you." The following day, the sky was a slate gray, casting a somber mood over Brookfield. Alicia and her mother had spent the morning quietly, the check from Mr. Hawthorne still sitting on the kitchen counter, like a small beacon of hope. It hadn't been cashed yet, and Carla kept glancing at it as if it might disappear. The gesture had been generous, far more generous than anything they could have imagined. But it also left them feeling uneasy. Taking money as a reward for doing the right thing felt foreign, uncomfortable. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Carla asked as she set down a plate of toast in front of Alicia. The kitchen was small but cozy, filled with the comforting smell of coffee brewing. Carla's expression was one of concern, her brow furrowed as she looked at her daughter. "I guess so," Alicia replied, poking at her breakfast absent-mindedly. "I just can't stop thinking about yesterday. I didn't expect Mr. Hawthorne to be so different." Carla nodded, sitting down across from her. "Me neither," she admitted. "I've heard stories about him for years. People say he's grumpy, even mean at times. But the man who came here yesterday, he seemed broken, almost lonely." Alicia frowned, remembering the way Mr. Hawthorne had looked at the photograph of his late wife. There was a sadness in his eyes that she couldn't forget, a pain that seemed deeper than just losing a wallet. "Maybe he's been through more than we know," Alicia said quietly. "I wonder if that's why he shut himself off from everyone." Carla reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. "You have a good heart, Alicia," she said softly. "Not everyone would see that side of him, but I think you did." Before Alicia could respond, there was a loud knock at the front door. The sound startled them both, echoing through the quiet of the small house. Carla exchanged a nervous glance with Alicia before standing up. "Who could that be this early?" she murmured, heading towards the door. Alicia's stomach twisted into a knot. The memory of the police visit from the day before flashed through her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She followed her mother to the door, standing just behind her as Carla pulled it open. To their surprise, Mr. Hawthorne stood there, looking even more out of place in the bright daylight. He wore a neatly pressed suit, his expression serious and slightly anxious. Behind him, parked at the curb, was a sleek black car with tinted windows. "Mr. Hawthorne?" Carla asked, blinking in surprise. "Is everything all right?" He nodded curtly, then turned his gaze to Alicia. His blue eyes softened, but there was a tension in his stance, as if he were bracing himself for something difficult. "I need to speak with you, Alicia," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Would you mind coming with me for a bit? There's something important I need to show you." Carla's protective instincts flared up immediately. She stepped forward, her face hardening slightly. "If you need to speak with her, You can do it here, she said firmly. I'm not comfortable with you taking her somewhere without me. Mr. Hawthorne's eyes flickered with a flash of regret. Of course, he said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. I didn't mean to alarm you. It's just, this is something I'd rather discuss privately, away from the neighborhood. But if you prefer, you're welcome to come with us. Alicia glanced up at her mother, her curiosity piqued, despite the nervousness gnawing at her. It's okay, Mom, she said softly. I want to hear what he has to say. We can go together. After a moment's hesitation, Carla nodded. All right, she agreed, though the wariness didn't leave her eyes. But I'm coming too. Mr. Hawthorne gestured towards his car, and the three of them made their way down the front steps. Alicia climbed into the back seat, feeling the plush leather under her fingers as she buckled her seatbelt. Her mother settled in next to her, while Mr. Hawthorne took the front passenger seat, giving brief directions to the driver. The car pulled away from the curb, and Alicia watched her house disappear from view, a strange mixture of excitement and dread bubbling up inside her. The ride was silent, save for the soft hum of the engine. Alicia kept stealing glances at Mr. Hawthorne, but his expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. They drove through the town, past familiar streets and shops, before turning onto a long, winding road that led out to the outskirts of Brookfield. Alicia had never been this far out before. The landscape changed from the neat suburban houses she knew to sprawling estates, separated by tall hedges and wrought iron gates. Finally, the car came to a stop in front of an old gated property. The iron gates swung open slowly, revealing a large, weathered mansion surrounded by towering oak trees. The place had an air of grandeur about it, but it also looked neglected, like a beautiful old painting left to gather dust in a forgotten attic. This is your home? Carla asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. She had heard rumors about the size of Mr. Hawthorne's estate, but seeing it in person was a different story. It was, Mr. Hawthorne replied quietly as he stepped out of the car. He turned back to help Alicia and Carla out, his movements slow and deliberate. Please follow me. There's something I need to show you inside. Alicia hesitated for a moment, staring up at the imposing mansion. It looked like the kind of place you'd see in a movie, a grand old house filled with secrets. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her mother's hand resting gently on her shoulder as they followed Mr. Hawthorne inside. The interior of the mansion was dimly lit, the air filled with the faint scent of cedar and old books. Alicia's eyes widened as she took in the high ceilings, the sweeping staircase, and the rows of dusty portraits hanging on the walls. Everything about the place felt heavy with history, like it had seen far more than it was willing to share. Mr. Hawthorne led them into a study at the end of the hallway. It was a small, cozy room, lined with bookshelves and a large wooden desk. He gestured for them to sit down, and then walked over to a cabinet in the corner, pulling out a small locked box. This belonged to my wife, he said, his voice thick with emotion, as he unlocked the box and opened it. Inside were letters, photographs, and a small gold locket. He picked up the locket and handed it to Alicia, his hand trembling slightly. Alicia turned it over in her hand, feeling the weight of the delicate piece. She glanced up at Mr. Hawthorne, confused. Why are you showing me this? He took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. Because you reminded me of her, he said softly. My Elizabeth. She had the same kind of kindness in her, the same honesty. It's why I reacted the way I did when you returned the wallet. I was afraid of losing the last piece of her I had left. Carla's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. Oh, Mr. Hawthorne, she whispered. I had no idea. Alicia felt a lump form in her throat, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She looked down at the locket, tracing her fingers over the engraved initials. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know." Mr. Hawthorne gave her a sad smile. "How could you? But that's why I wanted to bring you here, to thank you properly. You didn't just return my wallet. You gave me back a piece of her. And that's something I can never repay." The soft hum of the car's engine was the only sound as Alicia and her mother made their way home from Mr. Hawthorne's mansion. The sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the road. Carla glanced at her daughter, who was staring out the window, still clutching the small gold locket Mr. Hawthorne had given her. "You've been quiet," Carla said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Alicia turned to her mother, her eyes reflecting the mixture of emotions swirling inside her: confusion, sadness, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. "I just didn't expect any of this," she admitted. "Mr. Hawthorne? He seemed so different today. It's like he's a completely different person when you get to know him." Carla nodded, her expression thoughtful. "People can surprise you," she said. "Sometimes the ones who seem the hardest on the outside are the ones who have the most pain on the inside." Alicia nodded, turning the locket over in her hand. "I can't stop thinking about his wife," she whispered. "He must have loved her so much. It makes me wonder what it would be like if Dad were still here." Carla's eyes softened, and she reached over to squeeze Alicia's hand. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said. "You've got his kind heart." They pulled into their driveway, the familiar sight of their modest home, bringing a sense of comfort. Alicia took a deep breath as they stepped out of the car, feeling a wave of relief to be back on familiar ground. But that relief was short-lived. As they approached the front door, they noticed something unusual. A police car was parked just a few feet away, and Officer Daniels was standing on their porch, his face set in a serious expression. The sight made Alicia's stomach drop. "Officer Daniels?" Carla called out, her voice tinged with worry. "Is everything all right? What's going on?" The officer turned to face them, his expression softening slightly when he saw Alicia. "I'm glad you're both here," he said. "I was hoping to speak with you, Alicia. May we go inside for a moment?" Carla hesitated, glancing at her daughter. "Of course," she said, her voice wary. She opened the door, stepping aside to let the officer in. They all moved into the small living room, where Alicia and her mother sat down on the couch, facing Officer Daniels. Alicia's heart raced, her mind replaying everything that had happened with Mr. Hawthorne. She couldn't shake the fear that something had gone wrong, that maybe she had made a mistake by taking the locket or by getting involved at all. "Am I in trouble?" Alicia blurted out, her voice small. The question hung in the air, making the room feel even smaller than it was. Officer Daniels shook his head quickly. "No, Alicia, you're not in trouble," he said gently. "Quite the opposite, actually. Mr. Hawthorne asked me to come here because he has a request, and he wanted me to help facilitate it." Carla frowned, her confusion evident. "A request? What kind of request?" The officer took a deep breath, pulling a small envelope out of his jacket pocket. "He wanted me to deliver this to you personally," he said, handing the envelope to Alicia. "And he wanted me to explain what it's about." Alicia took the envelope, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It was thick, and the paper felt expensive, like the kind used for important documents. She hesitated for a moment, glancing up at Officer Daniels, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Go ahead," he said. "Open it." With trembling fingers, Alicia tore open the envelope. Inside was a neatly folded letter, written in elegant, cursive handwriting. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the first few lines. As she read, her breath caught in her throat. "Dear Alicia," the letter began, "I cannot express in words how much your kindness and honesty have affected me. You reminded me of the person I used to be before life's hardships hardened my heart. You brought light back into my life, and for that, I am forever grateful." Alicia's eyes began to well up with tears as she continued reading. "In honor of your integrity, I have decided to make a gesture that I hope will help you in the same way you have helped me. Enclosed is a scholarship fund that I have set up in your name. This fund will cover your education expenses from now through college to ensure that you have every opportunity to pursue your dreams without financial burden." She stopped, staring at the paper in disbelief. "A scholarship?" she whispered, looking up at Officer Daniels, who nodded with a small smile. "That's right," he said. "Mr. Hawthorne wanted to make sure that you have the chance to go to a good school. He said it's his way of repaying you for giving him back something far more valuable than money." Carla covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. I don't even know what to say," she stammered. "This is incredible." Alicia's mind was spinning, the words on the page blurring, as she tried to process what was happening. It felt like a dream, something so good that it couldn't possibly be real. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "I didn't do anything to deserve this." Officer Daniels knelt down in front of her, meeting her eyes. "You did, Alicia," he said firmly. "You made a choice that many people wouldn't have made. You chose to be honest, even when it was difficult. And that kind of integrity is rare. It deserves to be recognized." Alicia took a deep, shuddering breath, wiping away the tears that had begun to fall. I can't believe it," she whispered. "This will change everything for us." Carla pulled her daughter into a tight hug, her own tears falling freely now. "I'm so proud of you," she murmured, "so incredibly proud." The room was filled with a sense of quiet awe, the kind of stillness that only comes when something truly remarkable happens. Alicia felt the weight of the locket around her neck, a tangible reminder of the bond she had formed with Mr. Hawthorne in such a short time. "There's one more thing," Officer Daniels said, breaking the silence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small set of keys. "Mr. Hawthorne also wanted me to give you these. He said they're for his garden shed. He thought you might like to visit and take care of the flowers you both planted together." Alicia's heart swelled with emotion. The garden. She hadn't realized how much it meant to her until now. It wasn't just a place filled with flowers. It was a place filled with memories, with moments shared that she would carry with her forever. "Please tell him thank you," Alicia said, her voice choked with emotion. "And tell him that I'll take good care of it." Officer Daniels gave her a warm smile. "I'll do that," he promised. "And I think he already knows." As the officer stood to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at the mother and daughter who were still wrapped in each other's arms. "You've got a bright future ahead of you, Alicia," he said softly. "And it's because of who you are, not because of what anyone gives you. Remember that." The weeks following Mr. Hawthorne's incredible gesture were a whirlwind for Alicia and her mother. The scholarship announcement spread like wildfire throughout the small town of Brookfield. Suddenly, everyone seemed to know Alicia's name. Her teachers pulled her aside to congratulate her. Her classmates whispered about her in the hallways, and her neighbors, who had always kept a respectful distance, now stopped by the house with words of admiration and encouragement. Despite the newfound attention, Alicia remained grounded. Every time someone congratulated her, she thought back to the day she found Mr. Hawthorne's wallet. She hadn't returned it for praise or rewards. She had done it because it was the right thing to do, because that's what her mother had taught her. And now she was determined to live up to the faith Mr. Hawthorne had placed in her. It wasn't long before Alicia found herself drawn back to Mr. Hawthorne's mansion. The old estate, once intimidating and unapproachable, now felt like a second home. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, she made the familiar walk up the winding driveway, the gold locket he had given her swinging gently against her chest as she went. On her first visit, after the scholarship announcement, Alicia had been nervous. She hadn't seen Mr. Hawthorne since that emotional day when he revealed the scholarship fund. Would things be different between them now? Would he act distant like he had in the beginning? But when she arrived at the door, he greeted her with the same warm, albeit slightly reserved smile. He looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him, his stern demeanor softened by a sense of quiet contentment. "Alicia, my dear," he said, opening the door wide. "It's good to see you. I was hoping you'd come." Alicia felt a wave of relief wash over her. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me to visit," she admitted, stepping inside. The familiar scent of old books and cedar filled her senses, and she realized how much she had missed this place. Mr. Hawthorne chuckled, a sound that was rare but genuine. "Of course. I want you to visit," he said, leading her into the study. "I've grown quite fond of our conversations. They remind me of better times." They settled into their usual seats, Alicia on the small plush armchair by the window, and Mr. Hawthorne behind his large wooden desk, his hands folded neatly in front of him. For a moment, they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun cast golden rays through the window. "Have you thought about what you'll do with the scholarship?" Mr. Hawthorne asked, breaking the silence. His tone was casual, but Alicia could sense the genuine interest behind his question. Alicia nodded, her eyes lighting up. "I've been thinking about it a lot," she admitted. "I want to go to college and study journalism. I love writing, telling stories that matter, stories that can make a difference." Mr. Hawthorne's eyes softened, and he leaned back in his chair, looking at her with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "My late wife, Elizabeth, was a writer," he said quietly. "She had a way with words that could make the simplest moment feel magical. You remind me of her, you know." Alicia felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't expected the conversation to take such an emotional turn, but she could see the raw emotion in Mr. Hawthorne's eyes, the love and loss that he still carried with him every day. "I'm honored that you think that," she said softly. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Mr. Hawthorne replied, his voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat as if to dispel the sadness that had crept into the room. "But enough of that. There's something I want to show you." Alicia followed Mr. Hawthorne through the hallway, her curiosity piqued. They walked past the grand staircase and into a small room she hadn't seen before. It was cluttered but cozy, filled with old photographs, paintings, and stacks of books. In the center of the room was a large wooden box with brass handles. "What is this place?" Alicia asked, her eyes wide as she took in the sight of the room. "This," Mr. Hawthorne said with a small smile, "was Elizabeth's study. It's been closed up for years, but I thought it was time to open it again." Alicia felt a wave of awe and respect wash over her. She could almost feel the presence of Mr. Hawthorne's late wife in the room, the traces of a life well lived lingering in the air. She stepped closer to the box in the center, noticing a collection of notebooks and journals stacked neatly inside. "These were her journals," Mr. Hawthorne explained, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "She wrote in them every day, documenting our life together, her thoughts, her dreams, everything." Alicia reached out hesitantly, her fingers grazing the soft, worn cover of one of the notebooks. "May I?" she asked. Mr. Hawthorne nodded, his eyes misting over. "Please," he said quietly. "I'd like you to see a part of her that I haven't shared with anyone in years." Alicia opened the first journal, her eyes scanning the delicate, flowing handwriting. The words seemed to leap off the page, filled with a warmth and love that made her chest ache. The entries were full of stories about Mr. Hawthorne's younger days, their adventures together, and small, tender moments that painted a picture of a deep, abiding love. "Dear Solomon," one entry read, "Today we planted roses together in the garden. You insisted on getting your hands dirty, even though I know you'd rather be inside with your books. But I think you secretly enjoyed it. The way you looked at me when the first rose bloomed. It's a moment I'll treasure forever." Alicia felt tears welling up in her eyes. She glanced up at Mr. Hawthorne, who was watching her with a soft, almost wistful smile. "She sounds like she was an amazing person," Alicia said, her voice choked with emotion. "She was," Mr. Hawthorne agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you've brought back a piece of her that I thought I'd lost forever." The moment felt sacred, like a shared secret between them, a bridge connecting the past and the present. Alicia closed the journal gently, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for being trusted with something so precious. "I'd like to help you take care of the garden," Alicia said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop herself. "I know it was special to her, and I want to help bring it back to life." Mr. Hawthorne's eyes widened slightly, and then a slow, warm smile spread across his face. "I think she would have loved that," he said. "And so would I." From that day on, the garden became their shared project. Every weekend, Alicia would arrive early in the morning, her backpack filled with gardening gloves and a water bottle. Mr. Hawthorne, despite his age, would join her outside, showing her how to trim the hedges, plant new flowers, and care for the delicate rose bushes that Elizabeth had once tended with so much love. The garden, once overgrown and neglected, slowly began to transform. Colorful blooms burst forth, filling the air with the sweet scent of lavender and jasmine. The once wild rose bushes now stood tall and proud, their vibrant petals a testament to the care and effort Alicia and Mr. Hawthorne had poured into them. One sunny afternoon, as they worked side by side in the garden, Mr. Hawthorne paused and looked around, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You've given me a gift I never thought I'd receive," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You've brought life back into this place, and into my heart." Alicia set down her watering can and turned to him, a smile breaking across her face. "You've given me just as much," she replied. "A chance to learn, to grow, and to be part of something beautiful." The garden became Alicia and Mr. Hawthorne's sanctuary, a place where time seemed to slow down, where the worries of the outside world melted away with each stroke of the trowel and each fresh bloom that opened its petals to the sun. It was their shared labor of love, transforming the once neglected space into a vibrant oasis filled with roses, daisies, and tulips that swayed in the gentle breeze. Neighbors who passed by would often stop and stare, murmuring to each other about the change in Mr. Hawthorne's demeanor and the beautiful revival of his once lonely estate. But the garden wasn't the only thing blossoming. Alicia's visits became a regular part of her routine. After school, she would rush home, drop her backpack, and head straight for the mansion. It felt like a second home now, a place of warmth and friendship, where she felt truly seen and valued. One Friday afternoon, as she helped Mr. Hawthorne pull weeds from the rose beds, he glanced up at her with a thoughtful expression. "Alicia," he began slowly, as if weighing his words carefully, I've been thinking about something, and I'd like your opinion. Alicia sat back on her heels, wiping the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Of course, Mr. Hawthorne, she said. What's on your mind? He set down his gardening shears and leaned against the old oak tree that shaded them, looking out across the garden with a wistful smile. I've lived in this house for over 40 years, he said softly. It's been my home through all the ups and downs. But lately I've started to realize something. It doesn't feel like home anymore. Not in the way it used to. Alicia's heart clenched at the sadness in his voice. She understood that kind of feeling all too well. The sense of loss that lingers, even in familiar places. Is it because of the memories? She asked gently. Mr. Hawthorne nodded, his eyes misting over as he looked at the roses. Yes, the memories are everywhere, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Memories of Elizabeth, of our life together. They used to comfort me, but now it feels like they're holding me back, keeping me trapped in the past. Alicia swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. She had never seen Mr. Hawthorne look so vulnerable. He was always the strong, stoic figure in her life, the one who seemed to have all the answers. But now, she realized that he was just like everyone else, searching for a way to heal, to find peace. What do you want to do? She asked quietly, sensing that he had already made a decision. Mr. Hawthorne took a deep breath, his expression softening, as he turned to face her. I'm thinking of selling the house, he admitted. It's time for a new chapter in my life. But before I do, I want to make sure that everything here is in good hands. That's why I've asked you to be a part of this project, Alicia. I wanted to give you something special, a place where you could learn, grow, and create your own memories. The words hit Alicia like a wave, a mix of shock and gratitude washing over her. You're selling the house? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. But what about the garden? What about all the work we've done here? A gentle smile tugged at the corners of Mr. Hawthorne's lips. That's the beauty of it, he said. The garden isn't just a collection of plants. It's a symbol of our bond, of the friendship we've built together. And no matter where I go, that bond will always remain. Alicia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She hadn't realized how deeply she had come to care about this place, about Mr. Hawthorne, and the memories they had created together. I don't know what to say, she managed to whisper. Mr. Hawthorne reached out and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You don't have to say anything, he replied gently. Just promise me you'll keep visiting, even after I'm gone. This garden will always be here for you, Alicia. It's as much yours as it is mine. They spent the rest of the afternoon working in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden light over the vibrant flowers. It was as if the garden itself was glowing, a living testament to the love and care they had poured into it. That evening, as Alicia walked home, she felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. The thought of Mr. Hawthorne leaving was almost unbearable, but at the same time, she understood why he needed to do it. He was ready to move forward, to embrace a new chapter in his life. And maybe, she realized, it was time for her to do the same. The next day, Alicia found herself back at the mansion, standing on the porch, with a small gift in her hands. A notebook she had bought with her own money, filled with blank pages. When Mr. Hawthorne opened the door, his eyes widened in surprise. What's this? He asked, taking the notebook from her with a puzzled smile. It's for you, Alicia said shyly. I thought, since you're starting a new chapter, maybe you could write it down. Fill it with new memories, new stories. You've shared so many wonderful tales about your past, but I think it's time you started writing the next part of your story." For a moment, Mr. Hawthorne just stared at the notebook, his fingers tracing the edges of the cover. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, a real, genuine smile that made him look years younger. "Thank you, Alicia," he said softly. "This is the most thoughtful gift I've received in a long time." They spent the afternoon walking through the garden, talking and laughing as they tended to the flowers. It felt like any other day, but there was a sense of finality to it, as if they both knew that this chapter of their lives was coming to a close. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light over the garden, Mr. Hawthorne turned to Alicia with a serious expression. "I have one last request," he said quietly. Alicia looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Anything," she replied without hesitation. "When I'm gone," Mr. Hawthorne began, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to take care of this place. I've already made arrangements with the new owners. They're a young family, nice people who love gardening. They've agreed to let you visit any time, to tend to the flowers, to keep the garden alive." Tears welled up in Alicia's eyes, and she nodded quickly, unable to speak. She threw her arms around Mr. Hawthorne, hugging him tightly. He returned the embrace, his grip surprisingly strong for a man of his age. "You've brought life back into this old house," he whispered. "You've given me something to look forward to again. I'll never forget that, Alicia." They stood there for a long moment, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. It was a moment of pure, unspoken understanding, a promise that their bond would endure, no matter where life took them. As they pulled apart, Mr. Hawthorne gave her one last smile. "This isn't goodbye," he said. "It's just the beginning of something new." Alicia nodded, wiping away her tears. "I know," she said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "I promise I'll take care of the garden. And I'll visit, just like you asked." It had been weeks since Mr. Hawthorne revealed his plan to sell the mansion, but the reality of it didn't sink in for Alicia until she arrived at his doorstep one crisp autumn afternoon and found it eerily silent. The once vibrant garden was still in bloom, but the front door, usually open with Mr. Hawthorne waiting inside, was now closed. Alicia felt a pang of fear as she hesitated on the porch, clutching the straps of her backpack. She knocked gently, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, there was only silence. Then slowly, the door creaked open, and Mr. Hawthorne's familiar face peeked out. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes more pronounced, but he managed a warm smile when he saw her. "Alicia," he said softly, "I was hoping you'd come by today. There's something important I want to share with you." Alicia stepped inside, noting the changes in the house. Boxes were stacked against the walls, and the shelves that once held countless books were now empty. It was as if the life had been drained from the mansion, leaving it feeling hollow and echoing with memories. "Are you really leaving?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Hawthorne nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "Yes, my dear. The time has come. The new owners will move in soon, but I wanted to see you before I go. I have something for you." He led her into the study, the room where they had spent so many afternoons talking and sharing stories. It was one of the last rooms that still felt untouched by the move, with a few familiar books scattered on the desk, and the sunlight streaming in through the dusty window. Mr. Hawthorne motioned for Alicia to sit, then opened a drawer in his desk, pulling out a thick envelope. He handed it to her with a serious expression. "What's this?" Alicia asked, her fingers trembling as she took the envelope. "It's the official scholarship announcement," Mr. Hawthorne explained. It's a full-ride scholarship to Oakwood Academy, one of the best private schools in the state. It's already been arranged, and you've been accepted. You'll start next semester. Alicia's mouth fell open in shock. Oakwood Academy, she repeated, her voice barely audible. But that school, it's so prestigious. I never even dreamed of going there. Mr. Hawthorne chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Well, it's about time you start dreaming bigger, Alicia, he said gently. You've earned this. Your honesty, your kindness, your hard work. It's all led to this moment. Tears welled up in Alicia's eyes as she stared down at the envelope. She could feel the weight of the paper, the importance of what it represented. It wasn't just a scholarship. It was a chance for a better future, a chance to pursue her dreams without worrying about the financial burden it would place on her mother. But why? She whispered, looking up at Mr. Hawthorne. Why did you do this for me? He reached across the desk, placing a hand over hers. Because you reminded me of the good in this world, he said simply. When you found my wallet, you could have kept it. You could have taken the easy way out. But instead, you chose honesty. You chose kindness. And that's a rare thing, Alicia. It's something worth nurturing. Alicia wiped away her tears, a shaky smile breaking across her face. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. It's more than I ever imagined. You don't have to thank me, Mr. Hawthorne replied softly. Just promise me you'll make the most of this opportunity. Study hard, chase your dreams, and never forget where you came from. She nodded, clutching the envelope to her chest like it was a lifeline. I promise, she said. I won't let you down. They sat together in the study for a long time, the silence between them filled with unspoken words and shared understanding. It was a bittersweet moment, one that marked both an ending and a beginning. Alicia knew that Mr. Hawthorne was giving her a gift, far greater than just a scholarship. He was giving her his trust, his belief in her potential. The next day at school, Alicia couldn't concentrate on anything. Her mind kept drifting back to the envelope, tucked safely in her backpack. She had wanted to tell her friends about the scholarship, but every time she opened her mouth, the words got stuck in her throat. It still didn't feel real. During lunch, she sat with her best friend, Zoe, who noticed immediately that something was different. Okay, spill, Zoe said, narrowing her eyes at Alicia. You've got that look, like you're hiding something big. Alicia bit her lip, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Then, with a grin she couldn't hold back, she pulled the envelope from her bag and handed it to Zoe. Zoe's eyes went wide as she skimmed the letter inside. Oh my God, Alicia, she squealed, drawing the attention of everyone at the table. This is incredible. You got a full scholarship to Oakwood Academy? Alicia blushed, feeling both embarrassed and elated by the attention. Yeah, she said with a shy smile. I still can't believe it. The table erupted in congratulations, and Alicia felt a rush of joy, unlike anything she had ever experienced. For once, she wasn't being pitied for her family's financial struggles or looked down on because of where she came from. She was being celebrated for her achievements, and it felt amazing. When the final bell rang, Alicia practically ran home, eager to share the news with her mother. Carla was waiting for her on the porch, a knowing smile on her lips, as if she could already sense what had happened. Mom, Alicia called out, waving the envelope in the air. You're not going to believe this. Carla opened her arms, and Alicia rushed into them, hugging her tightly. I got the scholarship, she whispered into her mother's shoulder. I got in. I'm going to Oakwood Academy. Carla pulled back, her eyes filled with tears. "I knew you would," she said, her voice thick with pride. "I knew you had it in you, sweetheart. You deserve this." They stood there for a moment, holding each other, the joy and relief washing over them like a wave. It felt like all the struggles they had faced, all the sacrifices Carla had made, were finally paying off. "I can't wait to tell Mr. Hawthorne," Alicia said, pulling away with a wide smile. "He's going to be so happy." But when she arrived at the mansion later that afternoon, it was different. The house was quiet. The lights dimmed. Mr. Hawthorne wasn't sitting in his usual spot in the study. Instead, a small note was left on the desk, addressed to her. Alicia unfolded the paper, her hands shaking. "Dear Alicia," it read, "I had to leave sooner than expected. The new owners will be moving in next week. Please remember our promise. Take care of the garden and visit often. I'll be thinking of you always. With love, Solomon Hawthorne." Alicia sank into the chair, the note clutched in her hand, as the realization hit her. He was gone. The tears she had been holding back all day finally spilled over, and she let herself cry, mourning the loss of a friend who had changed her life in more ways than she could ever express. The following weeks, after Mr. Hawthorne's sudden departure, felt like a blur to Alicia. The house on the hill, that had once felt like a second home, now stood empty, its windows dark and lifeless. Alicia's routine had changed drastically. Her daily visits to the mansion had ended, leaving a void that she wasn't sure how to fill. Every time she walked past the winding driveway, a pang of sadness hit her, like a hollow ache deep in her chest. Yet she couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility, a promise she intended to keep. On the first Saturday after Mr. Hawthorne left, Alicia grabbed her gardening gloves and a small watering can and headed up to the mansion, determined to tend to the garden as she had promised. When she arrived, the gate was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. The once vibrant garden seemed duller without Mr. Hawthorne's presence, but Alicia took a deep breath and stepped inside, feeling the familiar crunch of gravel under her feet. She knelt by the rose bushes, her fingers gently brushing against the petals that were just beginning to bloom. The roses had been Mr. Hawthorne's favorite, and as she pruned the stems, she could almost hear his voice, giving her gentle guidance. "You're doing well, Alicia," he'd say. "Just a little more care, and these flowers will flourish." A small smile tugged at her lips as she imagined his face, the crinkling at the corners of his eyes whenever he smiled at her. The memory was bittersweet, a reminder of how much she missed him, but also of the joy he had brought into her life. The sound of footsteps on gravel pulled her out of her thoughts. Alicia turned, expecting to see one of the new owners of the mansion. Instead, she was met with a surprise. Zoe, her best friend, was standing at the entrance, a hesitant smile on her face. "Hey, Alicia," Zoe called, waving as she approached. "I thought I'd find you here." Alicia stood up, brushing the dirt off her jeans. "Zoe, what are you doing here?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Zoe shrugged, looking a little sheepish. "I heard you've been coming here alone every weekend," she said softly. "I thought maybe you could use some company. I know how much this place means to you." A wave of gratitude washed over Alicia, and she felt her eyes well up with tears. "Thanks, Zoe," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been feeling a bit lost without him. It's nice to have someone here who understands." Together, they worked side by side in the garden, weeding the flower beds and watering the plants. It felt good to have Zoe there, to share the space that had become such a refuge for Alicia. They talked about school, about the upcoming semester at Oakwood Academy, and about the memories they had made together over the years. But even amidst the laughter, there was a quiet sadness that lingered, like the last notes of a song fading into silence. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the garden, Alicia took a step back, wiping the sweat from her brow. The garden looked beautiful, alive and thriving, just as she and Mr. Hawthorne had envisioned. But it didn't feel the same without him there. "I miss him," Alicia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Zoe nodded, her eyes softening. "I know you do," she said gently. "But look around, Alicia. He's still here in a way. Everything he touched, everything you two built together, it's all a part of him. And now, it's a part of you two." Alicia felt a lump form in her throat, but she managed a small smile. "You're right," she said. He taught me so much. About life, about kindness, about what really matters. I'll never forget that." They stood in silence for a moment, taking in the beauty of the garden as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees. It was a peaceful kind of quiet, filled with the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft chirping of crickets. Alicia closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the memories wash over her. Just then, a car pulled up to the curb, and a young couple stepped out. They were the new owners of the mansion, a kind-looking man and woman who Alicia had only met once before. The woman smiled warmly when she saw the girls. "Hello, Alicia," she called out. "I'm so glad to see you here. We've been meaning to thank you for taking care of the garden. It's absolutely beautiful." Alicia blushed, feeling a mix of pride and shyness. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I just wanted to make sure it stayed healthy. It was important to Mr. Hawthorne." The woman's smile softened, and she stepped closer, holding out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "He left this for you," she said. "He asked us to give it to you if we ever saw you here. I believe it's something special." Alicia's hands shook as she took the package. It was light, but she could feel the weight of its significance. She nodded her thanks, unable to speak, and the couple left her alone with her thoughts. Zoe peered over her shoulder as Alicia carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook, the one she had given to Mr. Hawthorne before he left. Her breath caught in her throat as she opened the first page. There, in Mr. Hawthorne's elegant handwriting, was a letter addressed to her. "Dear Alicia," it began, "if you're reading this, then I've already left Brookfield. It was a difficult decision, but one I needed to make. I wanted to leave you something more than just memories. This notebook is for you, filled with stories and lessons I've learned over my many years. I hope they will guide you, just as your friendship has guided me. Remember, the garden is yours now. Take care of it, and it will take care of you. With love, Solomon Hawthorne." Alicia felt the tears spill over, rolling down her cheeks as she clutched the notebook to her chest. It was the final gift from a man who had become like family to her, a tangible reminder of their bond. She turned to Zoe, who was watching her with a sympathetic smile. "Are you okay?" Zoe asked gently. Alicia nodded, wiping her tears away. "Yeah," she said, her voice trembling but filled with a new kind of strength. "I think I am. He's still with me. He always will be." They left the garden hand in hand, walking down the winding path that led back to the street. As they reached the gate, Alicia turned for one last look at the mansion. The setting sun bathed it in a warm glow, and for a brief moment, she could almost see Mr. Hawthorne standing there, watching over her with that familiar smile. "Goodbye, Mr. Hawthorne," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." The seasons changed, and with them, so did Alicia's life. The days grew shorter, and the crisp air of autumn gave way to the chill of winter. The first snowfall dusted the town of Brookfield, covering the garden with a blanket of white. Alicia stood on the sidewalk, looking up at Mr. Hawthorne's old mansion, now bustling with the activity of its new owners. The young family had settled in well, and the laughter of children echoed through the halls that had once been filled with silence. Alicia visited the garden regularly, just as she had promised. It became a place of solace for her, a quiet retreat where she could reflect on the past and think about the future. She tended to the flowers, even as the temperatures dropped, carefully wrapping the more delicate plants to protect them from the frost. It was her way of keeping Mr. Hawthorne's memory alive, of honoring the legacy he had left behind. One cold, bright afternoon, Alicia found herself sitting on the familiar bench beneath the old oak tree. She pulled out the leather-bound notebook he had left her, flipping through its pages. Each entry was a gift, a piece of Mr. Hawthorne's wisdom, written in his elegant script. There were stories about his travels, lessons he had learned, and small, everyday moments that had brought him joy. Life is like a garden, one entry read. It requires patience, care, and a willingness to nurture growth, even when the outcome is uncertain. And sometimes, the most beautiful flowers bloom from the seeds we plant, without even realizing it. Alicia smiled as she read the words, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. He had known exactly what she needed to hear, even now, months after his departure. It was as if he were still here, guiding her, encouraging her to keep moving forward. She closed the notebook gently, holding it against her heart. Her eyes drifted across the garden, now bare and quiet in the winter chill. But she knew that beneath the surface, life was waiting, ready to bloom again when the time was right. As she sat there deep in thought, she heard a familiar voice call her name. Alicia. It was Zoe, bundled up in a bright red scarf, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She ran up to the bench, breathless but grinning. "You won't believe it," Zoe said, her excitement bubbling over. "The school just announced the recipients of the Special Community Service Award, and guess who got it?" Alicia blinked, caught off guard. "I've no idea," she said, laughing at Zoe's enthusiasm. "Who?" "You did," Zoe exclaimed, throwing her arms around Alicia in a hug. "It's for all the work you've done here, taking care of Mr. Hawthorne's garden and keeping his legacy alive. They're giving you a plaque and everything." Alicia felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. I didn't do it for an award," she said quietly. "I just wanted to honor him, to keep his memory alive." Zoe nodded, her smile softening. "And that's exactly why you deserve it," she said. "You've done something really special here, Alicia. You've made this place feel like it's still his, like he's still a part of our community." Tears welled up in Alicia's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy, of gratitude. She hugged Zoe back tightly, feeling an overwhelming sense of connection to the garden, to Mr. Hawthorne, and to the town that had become her home. The award ceremony was held at Oakwood Academy, in a small auditorium filled with students, teachers, and a few community members. Alicia stood on the stage, feeling nervous but also proud. She hadn't expected any recognition for her work in the garden. But as she looked out into the audience, she realized that this was bigger than just her. It was about the impact of a single act of kindness, the way one small choice could ripple out and touch the lives of so many people. The principal, a tall woman with kind eyes, handed Alicia the plaque, which was engraved with her name and a simple message: "For dedication and service to our community." Alicia held it tightly, her fingers tracing the letters as she stepped up to the microphone. "I'm honored to receive this award," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "But the truth is, I didn't do any of this on my own. Everything I've done here was because of Mr. Hawthorne, a man who taught me that kindness and generosity can change the world. He gave me a gift I can never repay, and I wanted to give something back." She paused, looking down at the plaque in her hands. "This garden isn't just a place," she continued. "It's a symbol of the bond we shared, the lessons he taught me, and the love he had for this community. I'm just grateful I could be a part of it." The room erupted in applause, and Alicia felt a swell of emotion as she stepped back from the microphone. She spotted Zoe in the front row, clapping enthusiastically, and next to her was Carla, wiping away tears with a tissue. Alicia smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. After the ceremony, Alicia stood outside the auditorium, holding the plaque close to her chest. The sun had begun to set, casting a golden light over the snow-covered grounds. Carla approached, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "I'm so proud of you," Carla said, her voice filled with emotion. "You've grown so much, Alicia. I know your father would be proud too." Alicia leaned into her mother's embrace, closing her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "Or Mr. Hawthorne. He changed everything for me." Carla nodded, squeezing her gently. "He gave you a gift," she agreed. "But you've given him something too. You've kept his spirit alive." Alicia looked up at the sky, the stars just beginning to twinkle in the early evening light. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure and a newfound strength. She knew that this wasn't the end of her journey, but rather a new beginning, one filled with endless possibilities. As they walked back to the car, Alicia glanced down at the notebook in her hand, the last gift from Mr. Hawthorne. She opened it to the final page, where a single line was written in his familiar handwriting. "Remember, Alicia, the seeds you plant today will grow into something beautiful tomorrow. Never stop believing in the power of a kind heart." She nods, as if answering a silent question, and turns away, stepping forward into the future with a smile on her face and hope in her heart. What do you believe is the most valuable lesson from this story? Honesty, the kindness, or the importance of nurturing the relationships in our lives? I'd love to hear what resonated most with you in the comments.